Hey there, Gothamites. Brian Ward here with another episode of the Arkham Sessions. With me, as always, the reason we are all here, the psychologist to all of Gotham's superheroes and superheroines and supervillains, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, Andrea.
Hi there, Brian. How are you?
I am doing very well. We are just coming off of our 1-year anniversary. Last week's episode was probably one of our most popular yet. It was Batman Mask of the Phantasm. If you have not listened to it, you absolutely should go back and listen, mainly because we are going to have a follow-up question right now. We had a number of folks let us know their opinions as to whether they thought Mask of the Phantasm should be used as canon, because we had discussed whether we were going to allow that movie to be used as canon, given that there was a bit of controversy as to where in the timeline it took place. Was it a standalone movie, or did it actually take place within the Batman the animated series universe?
Right, and so much about that story is important and would, alter a little bit of the current universe, right? So
correct.
The relationship that Bruce Wayne had with Andrea and the history behind kind of the Joker's involvement with the mob, and ultimately the reason why Andrea and Bruce Wayne couldn't have a relationship, and the Joker was very involved in that. The dismantling of that relationship, we can say. So for me, I think it's important that we can refer to that history, as it includes a lot of important events and trauma that might help us to better understand Batman's psychology. And I think your approach was, technically it's not part of canon.
The question was whether it was, because it's never really determined. We never see Andrea Beaumont again, and I say that with a little bit of an asterisk, because we do actually see Andrea Beaumont again. We just don't see her in Batman the Animated Series. We don't see her in Batman Beyond. We do, however, and it's funny because everyone, we got a lot of emails, a lot of tweets, a lot of DMs from listeners who insist one way or the other. Some people want to consider this canon, some people do not. And it's interesting because the split is about 50-50. A lot of people were adamant one way or the other, and no one side took a clear victory. I will say that everyone who believes this is canon alludes to one episode. And it's not an episode of Batman the Animated Series. It is not an episode of Batman Beyond, which takes place within this universe after Batman the Animated Series. This episode is actually from a Justice League Unlimited episode called Epilogue, which is an episode where we find out... let me just say some interesting things about Terry McGinnis, who is we will later find out is the hero of Batman Beyond. We do see Andrea again. We learn a little something about Terry, and I don't like that either. So while we might continue the rest of Batman the Animated Series, while we may even continue to do Batman Beyond after this series, we don't know yet, but while we might do that, I don't know that I necessarily want to jump to a Justice League Unlimited series episode in order to say that Andrea Beaumont did exist in the Batman the Animated Series universe.
And frankly, you don't have to. You don't have to use that evidence to, really allow us to use that history to talk about current events and his psychology and his development one way or another, because we're not, that's an argument where we're not there yet.
Yes, and I agree. I think that we could do Batman the Animated Series, the remaining however many episodes. We can do Batman Beyond, and we could just say that this is part of canon without there being a definitive reason that it is canon because of this episode.
Exactly.
That frankly I don't like to admit exists.
But for the sole reason that the film did come out between seasons
1 and 2.
Yes. 1 and 2, and although we haven't quite hit season 2 yet, we are just a handful of episodes away, and I think, we'll get there soon. So
Sure.
Trust me, I will not be bringing up Mask of the Phantasm at every episode. I just think that it's important to consider.
I know the way you work. You're going to be like, well, as we learned, Batman
maybe.
is messed up because Andrea broke his heart. Well, there was another question that a gentleman by the name of Raymond emailed us last week, and it is a follow-up to Prime Primeson's question in our anniversary episode. And it's actually in relation to the talk about how tragic the scene where Bruce ends up being there at the tombstone of his parents, begging to be allowed to be happy. And his email says, that scene got me wondering, could Bruce be happy and still be Batman? Would being happy mean giving up the cape and cowl? We talked a little bit about that. We talked about whether they could be happy together. And we just sort of jumped on the bandwagon that it would naturally mean that Bruce would have to give up being Batman. But we didn't actually tackle the question of, could Bruce have both? Does it need to be black and white?
Well, he certainly thinks it has to be black and white, which is why maybe we never really got to that part of this question.
Okay.
Because in his mind, they were mutually exclusive lifestyles. So he would just choose one or the other, or fate would bring him one or the other, or his parents would allow him one or the other, right?
Okay.
While he tends to be someone with self-direction and someone with initiative, he always has that sense of, I don't think it's so much spirituality as it is giving up his fate to some higher mission. And usually it's the memory of his parents and what their death represented.
Sure.
So I would say if he was in the position where he could have both, it's very possible that he could discover that could make him happy.
Could it also be a little bit of a detriment to that mission, in that we have seen superheroes in the past who have something to lose, who have family members that they don't want to put in harm's way, or they get trapped in their own thoughts because they are now second guessing things they could or should be doing because of how it might affect their loved ones? Could Andrea be a hindrance to that mission once he tries to walk that tightrope?
I think that certainly he learned that in Mask of the Phantasm when he was fighting that biker gang, and he for a moment was distracted because he was realizing that Andrea was in danger in this particular scenario. And because of that distraction, he lost his footing, or he kind of lost his, the higher ground for a moment. And he basically lost that particular fight. And I think that was a lesson learned for him, that, I should never again put someone else I care about in a dangerous situation. The flip side of that, of course, is because somebody I care about is in the same world I live in as Batman, I cannot fully, live the potential that is Batman. I will always have one eye, one part of my mind, one part of me will always be trying to secure their safety. So I think that he's already learned that particular option, isn't available to him. But, we keep skirting around this question, which is, okay, if he could have both, would that make him happy? I don't know that I could answer that right now.
I think you may have just answered it.
Oh.
I don't know that keeping one eye open ever allows him to be 100% happy. I don't know. It's possible, but he is not Peter Parker that way. He is not Spider-Man. He is not the guy who spins webs, captures criminals, and throws out a quip while at the same time then going and hanging out with Mary Jane, at the end of the day.
Right.
Bruce Wayne isn't that guy. And I don't know that keeping one eye open, I think his vigilance would prevent him from fully investing emotionally in that other relationship. We've actually seen that with Robin. We've seen that with Alfred. Now, that those aren't romantic relationships, but he has never fully invested in his relationships with those even closest to him.
Well, and one of the fundamental reasons for that is that he's not fully integrated himself. He's not fully whole. And it's not to say that he's completely pathological or there's something severely wrong with him, but this may sound cheesy, but if you cannot come to a place where you're right with yourself, where your house is clean, metaphorically speaking, you cannot really give yourself to someone else. You really cannot have that life partner, if you will, if you are not one whole identity, one that you care about, one that you are accepting. And I think that he is constantly seeing himself as a failure and constantly trying to better himself. And people, frankly, other people are just getting in the way.
That's true. As we've established in the past, his house actually belongs to 3 people: Bruce Wayne, Bruce, and Batman. So he would almost have to have all 3. I mean, think about what that would do. If Bruce was suddenly engaged and married to Andrea, that takes away the alter ego of Bruce Wayne. I mean, you can't necessarily have that same pompous playboy millionaire who couldn't possibly be Batman exist if he now has a loving wife at home. And, I think he would almost have to turn that persona around, and he would actually maybe have to sort of resort to being just Bruce in front of people.
Right. And remember, just Bruce makes him uncomfortable.
Very much,
He's not completely comfortable with just Bruce. And I think you have earned some kind of psychology degree over the course of analyzing Mask of the Phantasm, because I agree with what you're saying. For once, we're not at odds.
So what you're saying is, because of how smart I have become, because of what you have made me, you agree, and everyone, you heard it here first, Bruce Wayne, antisocial personality.
What? No, I never.
Okay.
That has really not been addressed.
All right. I'll let you have that one. This week, I think we're actually going to see a little bit of this as well. And that's with Birds of a Feather, the episode that we're covering this week. This is a story by Chuck Menville. It is written by Bren Stevens, directed by Frank Power. In fact, we even get to see his name as we check out the street signs. But there is something in here that actually reminds me of what it is we're talking about. We'll bring that up later. But this is the first opportunity we have had in a while to really explore the Penguin. The first episode where we met the Penguin was I've Got Batman in My Basement. Now, if you've listened to that episode, and by the way, I highly recommend that you listen to that episode, Drea at the end drops the bombshell that episode might actually take place in the fantasy of little Sherwood, the ginger boy, who has Batman unconscious in his basement. And he's fulfilling a fantasy life where he's the one who helps out Batman and hooks Batman up with his mom and saves the day with his friend. So that was the first episode where we really see the Penguin. And if it's true that there's the possibility that this happened all in his imagination, then we can't necessarily say that we've got an opportunity to analyze him in that episode. But that's okay, because we don't anyway. That episode, we see very little of the Penguin.
Right.
We see very little of his psychosis. And his mindset in that episode. So then
now
we
there
move
you
forward.
go. You've only recently received your fake doctorate, and you're using the word psychosis.
I listen to you a lot, so
I wouldn't say that he's psychotic.
But there are times when maybe he would have been. For instance, in Almost Got Him, Penguin has devised this plan just to kill Batman. So I've almost got to believe that if you've got a guy who devises this really elaborate plan that involves a zoo or an aviary of some kind, he might have poisoned their beaks. We don't know. Like, he's using poisoned tipped beaks to kill Batman. There's got to be a little psychosis there, right?
No,
like,
well, I mean, no. This could be
this is the work of a normal human being who just
this is really Psych 101 in that I think you might be referring to sociopathy. That's
what I meant. And I'm pretty sure if we rewind the tape, that's what I said. I said
think you
sociopathy.
said psychotic.
I may have said sociopathy. I don't know. Everyone, you let us know what you think.
Okay. Well,
all right, I may have said psychosis.
All of this can be clarified throughout this episode, but psychosis, of course, is a thought disorder or a symptom of a thought disorder characterized by some kind of break from reality. Usually hallucinations, delusions, something like that.
Then in that case, you were right. He has never gone off the rails into something out of reality.
Correct.
Unless, of course, this entire universe is just in his mind.
The entire animated series is just a product of the Penguin's psychotic mind.
Maybe this entire universe is in the mind of Sherwood.
Oh, that's creepy.
And now we've just boiled it all down to Sherwood's psychosis. Okay, all right, then you're absolutely right. The Penguin is not necessarily showing psychotic signs. I will leave that to you. You're the doctor.
And I revoked your fake license and or degree.
I'll get it back by the end of this episode, I promise. But this is their first real opportunity to explore the Penguin as a character, because this episode really is more than any other just about the Penguin. In fact, it's not even all that much about Batman so much as Penguin is front and center in this episode. And I know how much you absolutely adore Oswald Chesterfield Cobblepot.
I do. And there have been so many versions of this character in, of course, the original Batman television series. One of my favorite Batman films, which I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, but maybe one of the best ones.
If by one of the best ones, you mean one of the 7 best Batman
movies.
It's
up there. It's in my top 3 or 4. Batman Returns. We've got quite an interesting depiction, of course, in the TV show Gotham, and several comics, some one-shots, some...
You're a really big fan of the Greg Hurwitz run.
Yes.
Pain and Prejudice, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good run that I believe is 5 issues, and it's just a great story about his upbringing, his family, his relationship with his mother, and then his relationships as an adult, and how he... much like the episode we're talking about, how he reaches out or is open to relationships, specifically romantic relationships, and tests out some of his theories about the world and society, and inevitably, and this is why I like this character so much, learns a very tragic lesson and kind of converts back to the old lessons of his life. It's almost as if, and we've talked about this in previous episodes of the show, it's as if he's checking out to see if the world is just as bad as he imagined. And
right.
it usually is. The world usually treats him just as poorly as he believed it would. And I think that
Is part of that sort of self-fulfilling, though? Is it because of his... And we'll talk a little bit about this in this particular episode, but is it because of who he is, the persona that he has put on, that causes people to look at him that way?
You know my answer to this kind of question, which is there are multiple factors involved. So part of it is how he interacts with his environment, and that comes up actually quite a bit in this episode. And part of it, of course, is how society treats him. This is a character that I think in every depiction, every variation. This character is an oddball. He's a bit grotesque. He's an outcast. He physically, is quite unlikable. And I think that plays a huge part in the way that society treats him. And nonetheless, you have this very interesting ego, this very interesting identity that he has, where he actually believes that he is of high society. And again, that's pretty consistent in pretty much all the variations.
This, of course, dates back to 1941 and The Origin of the Penguin, as written by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Finger, of course, believing that the tuxedo was very reminiscent of the Emperor Penguin, and giving him a very sort of high society persona that we've come to know the Penguin as being a part of. But at the same time, the Penguin, who I agree with you, is in control of himself, is not the psychotic character that we're used to seeing Batman go up against. He sees himself almost completely differently than the rest of the world sees him. And yet he has got that image of himself that he believes the rest of the world sees that sort of makes him the way that he is.
Right. And again, my understanding, my interpretation of that is that this is not some kind of delusion he has. It's more so it just speaks to the strength of this particular part of his identity, or the strength of that ego.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about...
And that ego, I think, is a little bit well-deserved. He is a genius.
Right,
he
but as we'll talk about, there's a fragility to the other side of that, which is, I believe he is somewhat aware of his failings and his flaws. And so when that comes up, especially in this episode, he reacts to it. So why don't we jump in? I mean, we've been talking about the episode, so let's get into it.
The episode begins with a heist. It is the Penguin doing what he does best, and that is robbing folks. But he is not just robbing any folks, he is robbing the richest, the high society.
Sorry about the intrusion, sir, but at least you've been ransacked by a man of impeccable taste.
Batman breaks up the robbery, and instantly I have questions.
2 days out of prison, and you're back to your old games, huh, Penguin?
Now, this isn't necessarily a extraordinarily well thought out robbery. This was almost as if the Penguin wanted the Batman to show up, because he's not speedy about it. He is quite deliberate in his actions, and he's not quick about anything. He is almost reveling in this crime and this need to commit crime. Does the Penguin have some sort of addiction to crime at this point? Why can he not go 2 days out of prison without robbing the richest of the rich in a very slow, deliberate way, knowing that the Batman is watching him?
Well, I think that part of this scene, we learn that he knows about the art. He's able to name the artist, and he's able to identify what some of the most valuable pieces are.
Sure.
So I think this is all in part of his pursuit of being part of the elite. Now, the episode didn't go into this, but I wonder if he is somehow trying to keep up this particular persona, and he needs his home. It's only day 2 of being out. I don't know what his house looks like. Maybe he needs to furnish it with valuable stolen art, so that he can, for one, brag about how much he knows about this kind of stuff, but also to surround himself with incredibly elite types of purchases and belongings and objects. So it doesn't seem outlandish for him to immediately start to go after this stuff again.
I think it's one of those situations too where the Penguin isn't necessarily a high society sort of person. It's just what he wants to be. So he's putting on those airs. It's possible, and I've known people like this, they learn about that artwork just so they can say it later, just so that they can advertise that they are high society. And the weird juxtaposition between the Penguin and who we later see are really the villains of this episode, I think sort of plays to that a little bit. And that's that the Penguin is almost advertising that he's high society, that he is better than most people, and that he will only rob those who deserve to be robbed by the Penguin.
Right.
You know, and so that happens, but the Penguin is actually the person who brings himself down in this case. He uses one of his trick umbrellas as the Batman is trying to bring him down, and he's actually got him on the ropes. I mean, he's got him hiding behind banisters, and he is firing off his machine gun umbrella, and Batman throws a batarang. The machine gun follows it, ends up hitting a chandelier. That chandelier crashes down on the Penguin. The next thing we know, Penguin is in prison, and it's the day he's being released. There is one newspaper clipping on the wall of the Penguin's cell, and it's the Penguin being captured that day. And that is really what he's referencing when he insists that he has learned his lesson and that he will never again be a criminal.
Never again.
What is it about that newspaper clipping? What is it about a person who would put this failure on his wall of his cell and then come to the conclusion that he might be rehabilitated? Andrea, having been someone who has worked in a hospital scenario, not necessarily for the criminally insane, but having worked in a hospital scenario, what sort of rehabilitation does someone like this need?
Mm-hmm. Well, to answer your first question about that particular event, it is very possible that there was something about his capture. There was something about that event that led him to turn a new leaf, if you will.
Okay.
Clearly, if he was holding on to that particular clipping, he identified something about that experience. And it could be his rationale, for instance, of recovering, of finally, getting better, so to speak, and deciding to no longer engage in this kind of criminal behavior. Mm-hmm. Now, we've not really gone into correctional rehabilitation on the show before, so we've talked about it just in passing.
This sounds like a perfect opportunity.
So when we talk about rehabilitation, we are referring to a number of different psychosocial programs and services that are specifically designed to assist offenders in kind of addressing their needs, usually related to what it is they're in for, their offending behavior, and to help them achieve a more productive lifestyle, decrease aggression, decrease substance abuse.
So you might freeze a prisoner and give him like a rehabilitation, like a knitting, so that when he comes out of frozen hibernation, he can like knit sweaters.
Is that like a Demolition Man
reference?
Okay.
There you go.
No.
Oh.
In fact, there are, get this, well over 2,000 studies.
I'm sorry, what?
Really a lot. Over 2,000 studies that have looked into how successful rehab is following imprisonment.
So I have to ask, how conflicting are these studies' outcomes? Who is still funding studies that have had 2,000 different studies look at them?
The reason there are so many studies as opposed to, any other kind of area of psychology is that this is a really expensive process. So incarceration, the fact that we have so many people in prisons, and the fact that the rate of mental health problems is up to 3 times more in prison environments than in the regular environment. That says that a lot of interested people in the government, a lot of interested people in research areas, a lot of interested people in the field of psychology are investing in understanding how these folks can get better. And then what's quite fascinating, actually, is that it really depends on the type offense. It depends on the type of intervention. It depends on how much intervention they received and the process in which they received it.
Wow.
So luckily we know quite a bit from that body of research, and through some examination of those studies, the rearrest rate is about 2/3. So 2/3 of offenders who are released are usually arrested again within 3 years of their release, usually being reconvicted and incarcerated for some new crime. And that new crime is typically somewhat related to their previous history. This is why we often say, what is the best predictor of future behavior? Past behavior.
Past behavior. So
right?
the other third are rehabilitated, or
You're so positive to like look at the silver lining here.
Or I'm looking, I'm hoping that you don't say the other third are arrested within 4 years of their. Oh.
Well, unfortunately, this is why there are 2,000 studies. They can follow up every year.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the follow-up study I'm referring to by the U.S. Department of Justice in 2006 showed that after a follow-up of 3 years after their release, a good 2/3 were reoffended and were rearrested, so to speak.
So once the Penguin ends up getting out of prison, he decides he wants to rejoin his people, the true elite. Unfortunately, there is no one waiting for him outside the prison.
What's the matter, Penguin? Maybe the cream of society's curdled, huh?
And Drea, I don't know about you, but I, for one, sort of felt this was a very sad scene. Seeing that no one cared that the Penguin was getting out of prison. I know I shouldn't feel this way because it's the Penguin.
Right.
But no one was there waiting for him, and that's sad.
Well, what's sad is that he anticipated that someone would be there. In fact, he believed there would be this limo and that perhaps, his right-hand men, his henchmen would be there. And in fact, when he returns to his hideout, no one's there.
Yeah,
it's barren.
He thinks the other rogues will be there. He thinks that they're having a party for him and that they might be celebrating his release. But it turns out that no one is there, and it's sad because on one hand, the guy thought he was going to be rehabilitated and he's going to go the straight life. But on the other hand, he realizes that the only friends he has are Two-Face and the Riddler and the Joker and, these characters that he thought were going to be there waiting for him, which must mean that they are not in prison currently. So the only person waiting for him at his hideout, at his home, is Batman.
Oh, no, not you.
Who basically makes it clear that he is going to constantly be watching Oswald, waiting for him to mess up again.
Right.
Which has got to be equally depressing to know that even though you've got it in your head that you are going to be different, the people expect a certain thing out of you. And
Right.
and Drea, being the psychologist, I'm hoping maybe you know a little something about this. What kind of damage can that do to someone's psyche?
Well, certainly the idea that he's been incarcerated multiple times and that's sort of that's a part of his identity, that is really telling. That means that this could be evidence, not having any social support when he comes out of prison could be evidence that folks are kind of over him, that, he's messed up one too many times.
It might also be why he can't go 2 days without committing a crime.
It could be. And, there are some fascinating approaches around the area of rehabilitation and psychology, especially around the stigma. Like, what happens to you once you've been released? Are you, even if you show signs of recovery, are you going to be accepted? And the word is reintegrated, right? Will you be reintegrated into society?
Right.
And there are a lot of barriers and challenges to that because society will continue to treat you like a criminal.
Right.
And this is where I think the show, kind of really represents that process well, because he is isolated, he's abandoned, now Batman is stalking him, expecting him to fail, expecting him to F up. And that is all very similar to what happens to a lot of men and women who have done their time, who have received intensive care and intervention, and when they attempt to reintegrate, there are some very, very difficult times and challenges ahead because people expect them to be antisocial. They expect them to be aggressive. They expect them to go back to their criminal ways.
Mm-hmm. Is this why the Penguin is so revered in, say, prison society? He is clearly above them. He is clearly part of high society whilst in prison, but not necessarily part of high society whilst in Gotham. Is that possibly why he feels the need to maybe be incarcerated?
Well, you're saying that his aim is to get back into jail.
Potentially. I think there's got to be something behind the idea that you've got a character who can't not rob someone 2 days later, knowing that the Batman is watching him. And then later we even hear Batman say,
I knew you couldn't stay clean for more than one day.
So that implies that the Penguin is regularly in jail. Like that he's probably in prison more than he's not in prison.
Right.
And I'm sure in prison he is the upper echelon. So I'm wondering if he needs to be that big bird in a little iceberg.
It's very possible. And it could bring, you bring some rationale to his strange choices of engaging in criminality immediately after his release.
Did I earn my doctorate back?
No, not at all.
All right, I still have a little bit of show left. This is when we're introduced to the people I really consider the villains of this show. And that is Veronica Vreeland and her really uppity, snobby, I don't know, for lack of a better word, sort of manservant Pierce. And Veronica is complaining that she has only received 24 invitations this month, which means that her social status is clearly on the decline. And this is basically their way of saying that, she's clearly not as popular as she was last month. So, oh my God, what am I going to do? And should I be offended, Drea, that, by the way, she is so ginger?
She is. She's a beautiful redheaded woman. And he is a very annoying,
the
unattractive
kind of person
man.
who would sound like that.
Right. Well, and
He looks exactly that way. He looks exactly the way that sounds.
It's so funny because they are, if you take Bruce Wayne, like the persona that Bruce Wayne tries to put on, they are that to like the 10th degree.
Paris Hilton. They were the Paris Hilton
Kind
before
of,
Paris
right.
was around.
So our understanding is they are the higher echelon of society in Gotham, and they basically live their lives by throwing and attending gatherings and parties. And they even brag in this scene that the Joker had attended a previous party.
The Joker had crashed a previous party.
But the Joker's yesterday's news.
But you know who's in? The Penguin. Penguin
Right.
was just released. He is totally in, and it would be awesome to bring him to a party. So she has decided she is going to throw a very intimate party, maybe only 100 or so of her closest friends. And that means that she has to sort of engage with the Penguin. So what does she do? She actually goes and asks the Penguin for what is essentially a date.
Are you free for dinner tomorrow? 7-ish? At Angelo's?
And this is where it's interesting because the Penguin shows his true colors. While he likes to think of himself as very high society, he is a very grotesque person. The way that he eats the fish, the way that she looks at him, the way that other people in the restaurant look at him, the way that other people know that because of his criminal nature, they won't spend money in that high-end restaurant. They insist that they need to leave.
Come along, Binky. We've already been robbed once this year.
That I find fascinating because you've got a guy who has one sort of idea about himself. Meanwhile, you've got the rest of society who look at him entirely differently. Talk a little bit about that drama.
Well, it's not so much drama as it is a particular kind of personality profile and possibly narcissistic personality disorder, which I know we've covered a bit on the show before. As you recall, narcissistic personality disorder is a very long-standing, enduring set of traits having to do with grandiosity, an overwhelming need for admiration, usually kind of lack of understanding or realization that they're not getting that admiration. People who are narcissistic. Now, I'm not just talking about people who have big egos and are narcissistic. This is a particular personality disorder. This is a particular mental health illness, categorized as a mental health illness, which is, considered ingrained in their personality. Okay. So these series or these this cluster of symptoms, if you will, have a lot to do with, being so into oneself, so above everything, so grandiose that they kind of lose sight of who they really are. And oftentimes they miss the fact that not only are they not as great as they might imagine, but they might be really unlikable. And I've worked with some folks who really
are really unlikable.
Well, present company notwithstanding.
Right. I totally get that.
I've worked with some folks who fit this criteria and with some time reveal that they are really low on themselves or they're hard on themselves. So
so that was going to be my question, because the way that it's sort of described, you would think that someone with a narcissistic personality disorder wouldn't necessarily see themselves as being low. They would simply wonder why other people didn't see them as high. In other words, the Penguin clearly doesn't. I don't think the Penguin has a very high value for himself. I think he sees himself as this monster. I think he sees himself as society sees him. I think he wants to be something different.
Right.
And so he is putting on that personality. He is insisting that he is high society, even though that he knows he's not.
Right.
And so that to me would almost imply that it is not narcissistic so much as it's just really high hopes. It's well, reaching
right.
for the stars.
You're right. I mean, it sort of fundamentally, rationally, it makes sense. But I'm describing what happens with narcissistic personality disorder, and especially my experience of it. That yes, it appears the presentation is that this person is super arrogant, is exploitative of other people, has this big sense of entitlement. It's all about me. They're good at this. They're good at that. They're the best at this. They're just, the greatest person. And when you kind of dig a little bit deeper, you realize that they have very low self-esteem, that they in fact feel poorly about themselves, that they have a lot of fears of failure, that they almost have this fragile sense of self. Not only are they not all those things that they wish they could be, but they have a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity around who they are. It's a very fragile sense of self. So I think that he fits that personality disorder profile really well, because most people just see that kind of narcissistic, grandiose personality. And what we're seeing with more time spent with him, thankfully with this episode, is that he is hurting, that he is, he knows that he's flawed, and he's making a lot of attempts to get out of that, identity that he dislikes so much.
I think that that's probably the strong point of this episode, and that is that the Penguin sees the mistakes he has made. He sees that it's not getting him anywhere, and he then decides that he wants to turn it complete 180 degrees, and he wants to live the life that he's always dreamt of without necessarily having to go toward crime in order to get there.
Right.
It's almost like The Secret. That book, and it's almost like as long as I believe that I am this way, it's going to be cool.
Yeah, I'll just make a collage. I'll put a beach on there, and someone's going to send me to Hawaii.
Yeah. So that kind of doesn't happen. He goes on this date, and he actually is grotesque. He eats fish disgustingly. People really dislike him, and you can even tell that she dislikes him. He, however, to his credit, sees through this. He actually says, so what are you really here for? What's your ulterior motive? He knows, and it's like you were saying, he sees himself. He knows exactly who he is. He knows he's got that level of dislike. There's no reason why this woman should be with him.
Right. So what would a person like you want with a person like me?
Right. And she actually says that there are a lot of qualities about him that she actually really admires. And this plays into that ego a little bit. That it plays into this disorder that he may have. It wins him over. He actually falls head over heels in love with this woman because she is giving him the attention that he has not gotten from anyone else other than maybe Batman, who just watches him in a really creepy way from the shadows.
Right.
After dinner, the two of them actually end up getting mugged. And believe it or not, I actually thought that at some point in time, we were going to learn that this mugging was totally put on by the Penguin and that he was going to be coming off as heroic. But no, it actually turns out the two of them were being mugged. And Batman...
Wait, and I totally thought it was going to be Batman disguised as a mugger, which he tends to do once in a while, like on the weekend.
No, he didn't have white hair in this episode.
Oh, okay.
When he's got white hair, then you know it's Bruce Wayne. So these muggers basically don't care who they're mugging. They're going after him anyway. The Penguin fights him off with his umbrella and is actually doing a valiant job of doing it until he is wrapped up by one of Batman's gadgets. Batman swoops in and apparently was maybe asleep, didn't see that the Penguin... This is a person that Batman said he was going to be watching like a hawk and yet didn't realize that these people weren't part of the Penguin's gang.
He went to get a sandwich or something. He took a break.
Apparently. Veronica actually tells him that he was there for the whole thing, but Penguin was actually not involved. He saved the day. Everything was cool. Completely takes Batman by surprise.
As long as you weren't bruised, my peach.
Peach?
Bruce knows Veronica and Pierce. Mm-hmm. Bruce actually ends up coming across the two of them, and the two of them say that they basically openly admit that they are going to invite the Penguin to their big party in order to make fun of him, and he warns them against it. So, Drea, this actually brings me to an email that we got from a listener named Leah. I find this email to be absolutely fantastic. She says, "Poor Penguin and Veronica, you stupid bleep." Our general reactions myself and other fans of the series have had when this episode comes around. However, I feel there's one comment being overlooked. Batman got stuck. Confused? Think about this for a moment. Batman is the only one besides the audience that gets to see both Veronica's and Penguin's sides of the story. As the Dark Knight, he is stalking Penguin throughout the episode, going from warning him to stay in line to pitying him for believing in Veronica's kindness to him. As Bruce, he has to witness Veronica and Pierce talking about Oswald behind his back and warning them not to mess with him. Now, to where the stuck part comes in. He has conversations with both parties, possessing details that the other side wasn't aware of, and he can't say anything about it. He knows that if he tries to tell Penguin about Pierce and Veronica's true intentions, he'll be met with either A, Penguin acting out without having to hear Veronica's confession, or B, Penguin flat out not believing him because he thinks Batman's just being bitter of his success. On the other glove, I like that, he won't risk making a more direct comment about messing with Penguin because that runs the risk of Veronica and or Pierce suspecting something is up. Batman had the knowledge that would have kept this entire mess from happening, but he couldn't let it out. As such, he was stuck. So that, I think, is a great insight into this episode. Bruce Wayne, the moment he hears that Veronica and Pierce are going to basically screw around with Oswald, knows it's a bad idea from their end. Now, from his perspective, it's because it's the Penguin. He couldn't possibly be rehabilitated. Because, as we've said, Batman tends to go toward the worst in people before he goes toward the best.
Right.
So he thinks it's a bad idea to bring this criminal to your party. But on the other hand, he gets to listen to these people talking about why they're bringing Oswald to their party, and he knows that that makes them bad people. And he can't tell either one of them without giving a little bit of himself away, which I think necessarily isn't true. I think as Batman, no one would question Batman knowing some information. Mm-hmm. But she's right. You would just assume Batman was bitter or angry, or whatever. So I find this to be a fantastic insight. And where does that put you and your thoughts about where Batman is in this episode?
Well, she makes a great point. And I don't know that, I think this is a position that a lot of us are often in. Mm-hmm. This isn't this isn't a Batman Bruce Wayne thing. This isn't a dilemma about, alter egos. We're always in this situation. This is frequently occurring, especially for young adults in situations that involve bullying. So Pierce and Veronica they're putting together this very cruel intentions kind of plot. Let's invite the freak over to this party and let's make him believe that I'm in love with him, and let's make him believe that we accept him, and then we'll have him as this circus kind of sideshow, and we'll get all the accolades for having him there, and it will be this huge joke on him.
You call it cruel intentions. Mm-hmm. I think of it as dangerously
innocent. Oh gosh, sure. Similar idea.
Right, absolutely. Similar.
Right. So that is, well, as you know, that's a very, very age-old type of prank to pull.
Sure.
And so knowing both sides is a dilemma that, I'm glad this listener brought this up, because, when we find out someone's being bullied, or someone is being talked about behind their back, or someone is, harassing someone anonymously online, we know who it is. That puts us in this Bruce Wayne Batman dilemma, in that we don't want to reveal that we know who it is, or that we know someone can be hurt, and we're kind of morally stuck. So it's fantastic. You're right. She brings up this really great moral dilemma that I think most of us can relate to. And what happens is that he doesn't tell either side. He doesn't violate the identities his secret identities. He continues to try to warn both parties. And, ultimately what happens is that the Penguin is going to have to learn for himself what it is that he's gotten into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these two end up going on a second date. Veronica and the Penguin, they go to the opera. There they're seeing Pagliacci. Now, this is one of those reasons why I absolutely love this entire series, because you would think that this is a a series strictly for kids, and yet they are talking about Pagliacci. They're talking about opera. They're talking about a very famous Italian opera, which, by the way, is kind of similar to this episode. I mean, this is a story that if you haven't seen it, you should. It's interesting. It is. It's not so dissimilar from the episode itself, and so I find that this writer and just the writers for Batman in general are some really smart writers that want to show off the fact that they are educated.
Right. Well, and the song that, is being sung, it's an aria in this opera, is the very well-known song that I know we've heard before. Many people have heard this song before, and it translates to "put on the costume." And it is this aria in particular is about this performer, this clown, who has just discovered something really tragic, and yet has to perform, has to go on stage and smile.
Right.
And that the tragedy of this is that he has to keep this exterior, image of being happy and of being an entertainer and of being lighthearted, but inside he's torn up and he feels hurt. And so, I don't know. Of course, as a kid, I didn't know this, and now it's just another layer of tragedy on the story of the Penguin, because we know he's being played. We know this woman is manipulating him, and soon will make him a mockery. And we're listening to this aria that is referring to this tragic song about being everyone's entertainer and hurting inside.
And once again, we get to see a little bit of the Penguin's true colors, in that if you go to a concert, odds are you can sing along and no one will think odd of you. But if you go to an opera and you start singing along, especially in a Penguin-esque like manner, people are going to think weird of you, and that's exactly what Oswald does. He's singing along to this aria, and he's doing it in a very... And
please never ever do that again.
I'm gonna do it a lot.
No,
just so you know. But we get to see exactly what kind of a person Penguin is, and yet again we see it's not as high society as Penguin would like to believe.
No, he misses the mark. He knows the words, which is way more. I don't know the words to this Italian aria. He knows the words, and yet his social behavior is off. It's inappropriate, and one could say that I think in those moments, I'm not sure that he's well aware that what he's doing is unacceptable or inappropriate.
No, I agree with you. I think he has no clue. I think he is showing off, and I think to him that's perfectly acceptable. I think that's what other people are probably doing. And to be honest, that is probably what other people are probably doing. That is probably what Veronica and Pierce do on a regular basis. They talk about other people, and they talk about their artwork, and they talk about their riches, and they talk about all these things the same way he is doing them. They just do it at other times. And Pierce actually laughs at him, and Bruce, who's right next door in the next box over, hears the whole thing. So Bruce is still privy to all of this mockery, and yet can't really do anything about it. And at the same time, might not want to do anything about it, because again, as Bruce Wayne or as Batman, he can't believe that the Penguin is turning over a new leaf. And that is probably best exemplified during the actual party, where the Penguin is making all of these crass jokes at the party. People don't really want to be around him. Veronica actually is uncomfortable now, not because she is turned off by the Penguin, but because she is now starting to realize that maybe this joke isn't a good joke, that maybe it's a bad idea. Pierce, on the other hand, is all for it.
Can you imagine tomorrow's papers? There's not enough ink to print all his faux pas.
And the Penguin actually leaves the room and starts to look at a piece of jewelry. Bruce walks in and almost in a way that would reveal that he's Batman to a more astute observer would say,
Admiring the Vreeland jewelry, Mr. Cobblepot?
"Oh, you're interested in their jewelry." and he shows off that actually his intention is to give her a piece of his jewelry. It is a penguin-shaped brooch that is bejeweled and looks quite magnificent. And Bruce responds, "Oh, well, maybe the news of your rehabilitation isn't exaggerated." A play off of Mark Twain's famous quote. And the Penguin goes in wanting to give her this brooch. It is clear that he actually has turned over this new leaf. And he overhears Veronica and Pierce.
You said it yourself. That fat bird would never get invited to a party like this. Not with those clothes, that waddle, those flippers.
Oswald!
Did she mention my fine Roman nose?
And he gasses them and he steals Veronica away, and Batman then has to go get them. Penguin wants $1 million out of her savings, her trust fund, and Pierce has to be the person to deliver it to him. He wants Pierce to be involved in this pain and this suffering. Pierce goes to deliver it, and through a series of contraptions actually ends up back at the opera house in a very Phantom of the Opera type way. He ends up in one of the yellow duckies that we've seen in maybe your favorite Batman movie.
One of my favorite Batman movies.
One of your favorite Batman movies. He ends up in one of the yellow duckies, goes down the sewer, the river, the whatever, ends up under the stage of the opera house, comes up and finds Veronica strapped to a chandelier, a beautiful gold dress, mind you, but strapped to a chandelier, and the Penguin basically makes it clear that all he wanted from her was a little friendship.
Right.
Which is gut-wrenching to think about.
Well, and this goes back to what I said before we started this episode, in that he had some previous experiences and potentially some traumatic experiences that, weren't outlined in this episode of the animated series, but clearly his vision, his perspective of the world is that society is mean, society is unjust, people will hurt my feelings, people will harm me. In order for me to succeed, I have to be better. I have to pretend to be better. Mm-hmm. I have to one-up people. I have to hurt them before they hurt me. Mm-hmm. So these are sort of, what we call core schema, cognitive beliefs, really fundamental beliefs that he has developed over the course of his life. And here's this woman who wants to be his friend, who is reaching out to him, who is offering him something that is rarely offered to him. And although he questions it in the beginning, he learns to believe her, and he puts his trust into that. He trusts her. And so to learn that, in fact, she was betraying him, that she was using him, and I think the clincher here is that she was attempting to make a spectacle out of him.
Right.
Really confirming, no, you are a freak of society. You are low. You are nothing. And I am, I'm going to reveal you as such.
Yeah.
That ultimately what happened is all of those negative feelings resurfaced. And rather than what most of us would do, would, be to feel hurt, cry, go to someone else, potentially feel depressed, anxious, whatnot. He had a more severe, very extreme reaction or response, which is to engage in violence. And he's essentially going to murder them. He's going to cut the rope. She's on the chandelier. She's going to fall on Pierce, and they're both going to die.
And it's almost a learned response. I mean, it's like you were saying, he believes that society feels this way. He believes that they have made him this way. They believe that they will constantly come to him or come at him like a monster. You almost have to wonder, can you blame him?
Exactly. If you think I'm this horrific, I will show you just how horrific I can be. I think it's a very natural human response. This is why I say he's not having a break from reality. These are not delusions. These are not, he's not psychotic. In fact, he is, although he has these, really insecure beliefs about himself, and he has this really fragile sense of self, oscillates between feeling, incredibly important to just the lowest person in the world. He has a good grasp about, usually about what other people think about him in terms of what he represents. And I think that this is how it can manifest.
Would you say that this puts him on par with, say, the Killer Croc that we've seen in the past? Not the stupid one from Almost Got Him,
that wasn't
which
Killer
was
Croc.
Actually Bruce Wayne, but the creature, the boy that is spent his entire childhood in a carnival, being mocked and being told that I'm a monster, who then becomes the monster. Would you say that is the same sort of thing?
Yeah, it's in the realm of the same thing, in that these are guys who have experienced the world in a certain way because of a number of different aspects: the way that they look, the way that they've been socialized, and perhaps some predisposition toward violence or toward criminality. And it is very true that you sometimes will react the way that you're expected to, or you'll behave in the way that you're expected to. And interestingly, there are a couple of great one-shots. I know I'm not allowed to talk about comics, but in some of the Joker's Asylum, one-shots that DC Comics does, there are a couple of interesting stories where, similar to this, a couple will take in Killer Croc and try to kind of become his friend and socialize him and love him. Mm-hmm. And, they usually want something else. And he learns his lesson, and I don't know, he kills them.
Can't end well.
No.
Otherwise,
No.
It wouldn't be a comic book.
I know.
All I wanted from you, dearie, was a little friendship.
This is very much in relation to the treatment of individuals who have criminal histories and are in the process of reintegrating into society.
I was going to say, what would you do in order to counteract, the Penguin or, Killer Croc? But let's talk about the Penguin. Clearly he is taken from this entire situation. Inevitably, he will be incarcerated again, where once again he is the upper tier of the prisoner lot. What would you, as a psychologist, do to help him?
A lot of work in correctional rehabilitation is in the area of positive psychology. Now, the majority of studies that I referred to in the beginning of this episode were looking at like cognitive-based programs, therapeutic groups, cognitive behavioral treatments, individual and group treatments, and some of those treatments have been found to be helpful. But when those treatments have been evaluated, it looks as though they reduce, repetitions of criminality by about 8%, some by 6%. So it really depends again on what's being targeted and the kind of treatment. So you're not necessarily looking at a high rate
right
there. But the area of positive psychology takes a little bit of a different approach in that the emphasis is on strengths of what makes people successful and happy. So the examination of concepts like, what is your purpose? What is your areas of, what are your areas of productivity, your future mindedness? What areas are you able to exercise empathy, wisdom, courage? And so rather than, well, what did you do wrong? And how can we fix that? The approach is, well, what are you doing right? What are your strengths? And how can we kind of, focus on that to help you live a more flourishing, kind of more meaningful, purposeful life following your release. Right. And this is, again, a little bit, different than what we've seen, because oftentimes people are seen to have bad behaviors. Like, well, you were in prison because you had bad behaviors. And so their likelihood of engaging in those bad behaviors is very high, especially when they're still looking to fulfill some unmet need. Like, sex offenders are still looking for, whatever it is that they're looking for when they were committing those crimes. But maybe they're doing that in a way that's inappropriate or in a way that's maladaptive. How do we, kind of teach them to look for those unmet needs in a way that's healthy, in a way that's more adaptive,
right?
And of course doesn't hurt other people. So the approach is much more around not let's slap you on the hand and punish you, but let's find some of your strengths and see if we can find some more meaningful, purposeful aspects of your life, and focus on that. So as an example, there's a program called the No Free Lunch Program, and it promotes a cognitive shift among offenders. Again, instead of avoiding failure, to more so looking at how do you achieve success. And they promote things like problem-solving strategies, that can be used by these individuals to apply those particular strategies and skills to build character, to secure themselves financially, to ensure healthy living, to encourage life plan and relationship development. And this is a very new area of research, but one particular study of the No Free Lunch program in Wisconsin shows some improvement. So the rate of recidivism there is about 3% after 3 years of release. Recidivism, of course, is rearrest, right. Reincarceration.
Very cool. So Drea, looking back at this episode, getting a little bit more of a feel of who the Penguin is, seeing that he wants to be rehabilitated, seeing that he wants to be treated as a human being, not as a penguin in society, albeit high society. What are your final thoughts on this episode?
I'm in complete agreement with what the Penguin says at the end of the episode.
I suppose it's true what they say. Society is to blame. High society.
The people that have hurt him the most are the ones who are, at the higher echelon of his social environment. And I think that speaks to, kind of the bigger message here, that there's something about the haves and the have-nots. There's something about the experience that people may have when they encounter somebody who's, very well off and who may see folks on the other end as not deserving or not as, frankly, not as human as they.
So what I'm hearing you say, for those at home listening and taking notes, blame the 1%. Just entirely,
no.
just blame the 1%.
No.
Oh no.
Not always. No, not at all. Okay. I think for this particular story, that's where the blame is put.
Sure.
But again, the bigger message here is certainly around.
And it's not even about the 1% in this, even in this one episode. It's not necessarily about the haves so much as it's about the people who see themselves as above other people.
Right. And the way that they react, or the way that they refer to to people who they look down upon, the NOKDs, not of our kind, dear. I think that is, really resonates with the idea that there are going to be groups of people that are marginalized, that are bullied, that are put down, that are disenfranchised. And I think that, this particular episode really speaks to that underdog, that feeling of being trampled on, that feeling of being left out, ostracized, all those things. And I think, to relate to the Penguin is something that we try not to do. We shouldn't have to. We shouldn't feel like, oh, there's something that I have in common with this sociopathic villain. But we do. We feel this kind of human connection to him because at one point in our lives, we've all felt this way. So this is an important, really special episode that I hold, near and dear to my heart because it has it has that message that's really, really personal.
Yeah, I love this episode. I feel like it's one of those episodes that very much like some of the others that we've seen give, if not an origin story, it certainly gives us a really good look at that particular rogue. And that always makes episodes like this and future episodes that much easier to analyze because we've got this to fall back on. We now know exactly what kind of person Oswald Chesterfield Cobblepot is. And I think that is a really good thing. I like this episode a lot.
Well, we know how he is because we can relate to him.
Yeah.
We're able to put ourselves in his shoes, and it's not that we can agree with some violent behavior he engages in, but we at least can understand where he's coming from.
Now let's see if the same thing can happen next week when we go after the Riddler once again in What is Reality? That's coming up next week, so everybody join us for that one. We want to thank folks who have contributed to this week's episode. Raymond, Leah, you guys absolutely rock. If you guys want to send us questions, you can email us arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can also send us tweets. We are at Arkham Sessions, and you can absolutely come like us on Facebook. Just look up Arkham Sessions, press like, and you can get all of our information, and you can send us information, whatever you like. Drea, where can folks find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc. Also, my website is underthemaskonline.com, and there's a contact link there where you can email me.
And you can find me, I am on Twitter at bward028. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And we are
the Arkham Sessions.